Yes, hello from the great American Northwest. I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. My name is Leah Prime, and this is the Invisible Night School. For those of you just joining us, the Invisible Night School is a small consortium of lay researchers and scholars pursuing the study and exploration of high strangeness. INS is not a monolith. We represent varied ideas, backgrounds, disciplines, and experiences, and seek to engage in good faith dialogue with other curious minds. Tonight, we're going to be talking about J.B. Rhine and the Duke Parapsychology Lab with Nick, and our newest adjunct faculty member, Jay Schenk, longtime friend of the show. And we're also delighted to welcome our special guest, Courtney Block. Courtney Block is the Instruction, Reference, and User Engagement Librarian at Indiana University Southeast. She's also the author of the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology from Rowman and Littlefield, 2022, and Researching the Paranormal, How to Find Reliable Information About Parapsychology, Ghosts, Astrology, Cryptozoology, Near-Death Experiences, and more, also published by Rowman and Littlefield back in 2020. Her work is featured in Volume 3 of The Feminine Macabre, and you can find an upcoming article of hers in Volume 35 of Haunted Magazine. One of the things Courtney enjoys most is combining her librarian and paranormal interests in teaching people how to locate free, credible resources on a wide range of paranormal topics. To see what she does when she's not staying up all night to meet writing deadlines, follow her on Instagram at liminal.librarian. So, beautiful introduction. I'm delighted to bring you all onto the show. So first, I'm going to welcome our resident dubious layman, Nick. It is wonderful to see you again, friend.
Hello.
Hello.
Did you compliment your own intro?
Did I?
Yes. You said it was beautiful.
Oh, it was beautiful.
It was.
What can
sure.
I say, man?
Yeah.
I'm basically a professional. And I'm, of course, going to welcome Jay as well. Jay, so great to have you, friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Coming to you live from the cold depths of space.
Oh, the K-hole.
Not really. I'm from a fortified compound in an undisclosed location, for real. But yes, thank you for having me.
Of course, it sounds about right. And of course, before I bring Courtney on, I also want to say hello to some of our weekly visitors. Definitely, we have Vancouver guy, Jeff Knox, friend of the show. We also have Fringe. Oh, commenting on space pancakes. That's right.
Man, those things look so good.
They look so good, right? They look like crepes. Spooky, great to see you. Of course, Duncan, we see you every week. Lovely to have you, as always. I did want to call this out. Fringe saying greetings from Mystic Delaware. I hope you remember that. Yes. The Earth, great to see you again. And we have Jack Brewer. This is like a who's who of some of my favorite people. Hi, Jack.
And Simon Fly appears to be awake right now as well.
Oh, fantastic. And then it also looks like we have a friend of Courtney's in the audience. So, now that I've said my hellos to everyone in the audience, brought you guys on, I'm going to bring in the woman of the hour here, Courtney. Courtney, welcome to the Invisible Night School.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm excited whenever like weirdos gather. I'm just so happy to like meet new weirdos, see some ones that I've already met, and just can't wait to see where this conversation goes.
Yeah.
Yes. Same. So, tell us about your relationship to J.B. Rhine and the Duke Parapsychology Lab. And I ask because I know that it sounds to me like you took a field trip. And I'd love to hear some about this.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So my relationship with J.B. Rhine and the Parapsychology Lab. So I have always been interested in the topic. Probably like so many of us here, I bet like it's just an inherent part of our lives. And I really started like digging into it in terms of like as a librarian, when I help people find information, at some point, like getting to know like, hey, there's this whole long history of people who studied things, weird things that I'm interested in, like extrasensory perception, ghosts, hauntings, and they all kind of called it parapsychology. And that's how I sort of got to know about J.B. Rhine and the parapsychology labs. And my books were really just kind of born out of combining my librarian skills with my paranormal interest to help other people know that because I think that there's like this stereotype that there's not credible like inquiry and credible research into these things, into these topics. And then to make a long story short, all of that coalesced. Last fall during my sabbatical, I took a trip down to the Duke University Parapsychology Archive.
Oh, cool.
And got to dig around in it. I was specifically most interested in looking into the lives of some women who were involved with the lab, but in the process learned a bit more about JB and his wife Louisa, who was also a doctor, got her PhD before him, I might add.
Was she was it in botany, or was that Joseph?
Both of them, yeah.
Oh, they both were. Okay.
Both of them were botanists. They have like these weird lives, right? Like, they were botanists by like training and degree. Louisa got her PhD she was a few years just a few years older than him too. And but they were also both really interested in psychology and like matters of like the mind. And I think that's just sort of what eventually got them invited to come to Duke and do studies and so forth. And but it's a funny like factoid, right? Like that they're botanists.
Yeah, I heard that they saw a presentation by Arthur Conan Doyle, and that kind of was maybe the impetus of it. Because if you recall, at the time, he was a big proponent of that. Even the guy was the Cottingley fairies, like you said, a little rusty here, but very much a proponent of mediumship, which was all the rage at the time, right? This is the late 1800s, if I'm right. Like late 1800s, early 1900s is when they went to Duke. Was it?
Well,
or was that later at Duke?
It was in like the late 1920s, early 1930s.
Okay.
They get invited
further along then.
Yeah. But yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle. I'd almost forgotten that he was like a big proponent of that.
That's so odd, because I think everything that he was a proponent of was a hoax. Like, even though he believed in it, everything that he was like, yeah, I'm really getting behind this, was just him being bamboozled.
He had a broken bullshit detector, which is really incredible given what he was writing, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, I mean, it's just
like it's super like rational, logically reasonable detective stories.
Well, of course, his inspiration was Dr. Bell, who he was sort of the pseudo Watson too at the time. He was a doctor who thought he could diagnose the patients without really speaking to them, which was actually kind of the inspiration for that TV show House.
Ooh.
The more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Isn't that strange?
I
want to, before we get more into the history of that kind of stuff, we have a lot of strictly UFO people in the chat, I'm pretty sure. And words like parapsychology get thrown around, and I think that they're kind of amalgamated with what we understand as ghost hunting or just paranormal investigation. But there is kind of a distinction there, right? I think that, what would you say that the differences are between what, your average person or our average viewer would think of as like ghost hunting and actual parapsychology?
Oh, this is such a good question. Okay. I think it's kind of fascinating that I think a lot of people don't realize that they hear this sort of big, like, clinical word like parapsychology, and don't realize that it encompasses so many different phenomena. Extrasensory perception, ghosts, hauntings, psychokinesis, poltergeist phenomena, which the researchers would just classify as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis.
RSPK.
Yeah, RSPK.
Yeah. It's really interesting. They're because there's a lot of crossover on what they're researching, right? Or what they're investigating. But they're kind of the perspectives are a little striking, right? Because from parapsychology, and like you were talking about RSPK, that's essentially describe what a ghost hunter would call a poltergeist, right?
Right.
So from the parapsychologist's mind, it's the person, the observer, that is essentially creating this phenomenon that the ghost hunter would be claiming as a separate entity, right?
Mhm.
That's kind of the gist, right? Like parapsychology looks at kind of the umbrella term of ESP. So like
Yeah.
you have telepathy, clairvoyance, and then the movement stuff, the psychokinesis, right? And that's
Yes.
kind of what plays into the poltergeist aspect. But
Yeah.
parapsychology looks at what's the word I'm looking for? Survival after death.
Yes.
Still, right? And which would encompass ghosts.
For sure.
Hypothetically.
Yeah. Yes, I love this. Yeah, they were really motivated. So before you have like parapsychology, which is what we refer to it today, you've got psychic research, psychical research, which I just think is like, I don't know, I think it's a lovelier, more charming way of talking about it. But yeah, and those folks were really motivated. Well, they were motivated by trying to figure out what, if anything, was maybe real or valid during that like heyday of spiritualism and so forth. But also they were really motivated just by what you just said, this notion of survival after death. And I do, to get back to your like question about UFOs, I do feel like, they're sort of like related but separate topics. I think that a lot of like, people doing parapsychological research are also super interested into UFOs.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think there is some crossover, but I haven't dug into as much of that.
I will say, and people that have watched me on this know I've read like 2 books and I keep bringing them up. So I will say for the parapsychological perspective, Scott Rago believed one of his thesis was that the UFO sightings were a really powerful psi manifestation.
Interesting.
Like that was in our haunted universe, because he uses that lens, I think, that came out of the Rhine studies, furthering it. He's looking at things like the apparition of Fatima. He's looking at that as a UFO thing, but he's like, it's a psi event. It's a psi manifestation. And he looked at several other cases that were sort of well known when he was writing that book, but he took it into, and this is one of those things that I haven't, remember those Ripley's Believe It or Not books that were like little paranormal factoids? I haven't really read about people's spontaneous vanishing of people.
That used to scare the shit out of me when I was a kid. I can totally remember reading that probably in a Ripley's Believe It or Not book, and it just... He
also, that was a spy phenomena to him. That was some kind of, really heavily psychokinetic or telekinetic surge, moving people.
It's like next level young on UFOs, almost, it sounds like.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me a lot of that. Or it reminds me, it even reminds me a lot of like some of the esoteric Buddhism or like esoteric Vajrayana, right? These ideas that in certain meditative states you can like literally like dissolve your body or escape the physical form.
I always say to myself, it's like the X-Men level psi manifestation, instead of guessing the Zener card or like making the little thing move in the lab. You are just like, I'm full on Jean Grey, like, here it is.
What's this book you're talking about, Jay?
It's our haunted universe by
that's ringing a bell.
Well, he titled it, what was Keel's book, Our Haunted Planet? He
Our
titled
Haunted World,
Our
I think.
Haunted World.
Yeah.
He titled it kind of as because he was also a fan of Keel, but
interesting. So you, Courtney, you touched on it a little bit. Parapsychology did essentially it was an offshoot of spiritualism back in the 1800s, right? But, it all kind of has that same origin point in history. I think we would all agree was the Fox sisters. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's got a fascinating history, and thank you for bringing this up. So Yeah, like what's really interesting, and somebody in the comments I saw was talking about how they were a fan of William James, which
Mm-hmm.
the father of like American psychology, right, was
Mhm.
into psychical research, but so many of our textbooks kind of leave that little factoid out. But yeah, so at the, like, you know, you got like the mid to late 1800s,
Mhm.
the spiritualism craze is like sweeping New York. It eventually like
Mhm.
sweeps Europe and the world. And at the same time, both psychology and psychical research is like being sort of born at the same time with each other. So like all of these things, and it was really, I think that fact like really kind of still is part of the reason why there can be uh, a lot of tension in the academy, like within among researchers about the value of psychical research or parapsychology, because when psychology was sort of coming up and trying to get foothold, and psychical research was also like trying to get foothold, you like people were either in one of two camps. You thought that psychical studies were a natural part of psychology, like
Mm-hmm.
why wouldn't it be? Of course, like all of these things happening, and you know, people seeing things and experiencing things. And then other people who were just like, no, that has no part here.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, a huge part of it, Nick, like you had mentioned, was motivated by people seeing spiritualism and seances and just like the craze that it was, and being like, I wonder what could be going on here. And so they set forward not only to debunk and ferret out fraud, but to also be like, is there anything happening here, and can we find it?
That is a good point. Is when the Society of Psychical Research started in England, one of their main things that they were doing was investigating mediums and even exposing them. Something Harry Houdini was doing, which caused the feud between him and Arthur Conan Doyle.
Yeah,
actually. But yeah, although there were some ups and downs in the beginning there, right? There was who were those on? They investigated and verified the Fox sisters. Is it Dee Home or Dee Hume? Could someone clarify that?
Daniel Douglas Hume, I believe. Daniel.
It's pronounced Hume, but spelled Home.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that's who the levitating guy who went out the window.
The Scottish guy. Yeah, yeah.
But then, oh gosh,
it's Daniel Douglas.
Oh yes, Douglas.
Yeah, I think that's where. I always get it mixed up.
I'm thinking of Wallace and Crooks. They kind of like, they were pre-society psychical society. They were trying to kind of demonstrate spiritualist phenomena via scientific method. And I think they actually are the ones who kind of invented table tipping, which ended up being used in a lot of mediumship. And then it was Michael Faraday, just a little while later, who kind of discovered and coined the ideomotor effect, right? Kind of how Ouija boards and pendulums are supposed to work. Now, he wasn't saying that every medium was doing that, but like there's a lot of skepticism in the early days that you wouldn't really expect to see necessarily, especially with such a spiritualism boom happening. But that was kind of the stepping stones that built towards the Duke Labs of wanting to take these, fringe and weird topics, like we still call them, and kind of try to get them into a lab.
Yeah.
I want to jump into one of the things that always strikes me about this subject and its emergence around the turn of the century, and then through Ryan's work at Duke. One is, I've brought this up on the show before, but it's worth repeating. This is really the first time in the popular imagination people are encountering invisible forces on a daily basis. Things like electricity, the telephone, telegraph, television, even. So there's all of this going on, radio, etc. And then the other thing, and I especially think of this, is like the first half, certainly, of the 21st century is we have World War I and World War II. We also have the American Civil War, obviously, in the late 1800s. And so you have a population that, one is sort of in the collective imagination has this idea about these unseeable forces that are permeating daily life and sort of restructuring how we engage with and relate to one another. But then we also have a nation that is fairly broadly and largely extremely grief-ridden. Like, these are people that are contending with the deaths of their fathers and sons and husbands and et cetera, et cetera. Probably actually not too different than what a lot of what's going on now in the post-pandemic, quote unquote, period, where you see the rise of spirituality because you are seeking people are kind of seeking meaning and processes through which to navigate and understand grief, both at a small and a large scale. And so when I think about the emergence of parapsychology, I can't help but also think about the broader kind of social, cultural, and historical context that these interests were emerging in.
I read another book, and
Jay has read 2 books.
I up to 3 because everybody knows, like, you should have, like, put a thing up. Yeah, we're going to take bets on how long it would take me to mention that.
This is like sleeping with me every night.
Jeffrey Sconce, who's actually a media critic, wrote a book called Haunted Media, discussing all of the forces in that. And that, I think, one of the major things where this got into the scientific foothold was exactly what you said. It was wireless telegraphy. Telegraphy.
I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying, because
we get it.
That was actually used by a lot of mediums in the day as a metaphor, like a little metaphor. You're getting a spiritual telegraph, receiving
invisible communication over long distances.
Yep.
It also
reaction at a different distance.
It sparked that medieval kind of concept of the ether again in popular culture too, which, like, is almost interchangeable from a lot of perspectives, from heaven or an afterlife, where spirits are, alternate dimensions when you get into some of the UFO stuff, but always this concept of, like, a parallel place next to ours.
Right.
And with that stuff flying around, that kind of, I think, really
that's where the UFOs live, Nick.
I think look, I'm going to stop this and say Bigfoot is a real flesh and blood animal that has a psychic ability to transit dimensions and comes to ours to poop. And that's like the final word on it. I will brook no other. I've solved it. That's done. Moving back on.
I'm down for that.
But no, it's a really interesting thing because Sconce traces that, and the other strong cultural force with that's interesting, that makes me, when you said about Louisa Rhine getting her degree first, there was like a proto-feminist messaging in the early spiritualists, because at that point you still had women couldn't hold property, they couldn't vote. A lot of the mediums were women, and a lot of the spirits were, correctly advocating for a more fair and equal society. And even I think, but I also think that brings on some of the we want to have some of the hostility, and some of the we want to have scientific proof of it. But I haven't read anyone discuss that outside of Sconce. That's an excellent book. He does not believe in this stuff. He is just kind of like, this is the actual beliefs of people were irrational, but the sociological forces behind them. He goes up through the early internet. It's a really interesting thing. But that wireless, both radio, both the telegraph and the radio were both sort of unprecedented. Really kind of the first technology you couldn't see. You couldn't see, it's like it really appeared magic to people. So that's definitely, because it just makes me think too, our level of scientific understanding wasn't quite what it was now. So of course we're going to look at whether these mediums might really have something going on here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up, because there have been a whole just like shelves of dissertations and like research that people have written about the ways in which mediumship, especially during that time, allowed women to sort of break free of the constraints of what was proper behavior, proper talk.
Yeah.
Some of them even had like handlers, like the mediums that got more popular, would have like sort of a, you might call it like a chaperone or something. And a decent amount of them were like female. And so I feel like it was, some sort of like, many of them were probably some sort of romantic relationships as well. And that allowed them to sort of live that life, during a time that, it wasn't encouraged. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot
So
of
fascinating.
Women like becoming new spiritual leaders and cultural leaders from that perspective. It is really interesting.
Yeah, that's what was going on with Theosophy, right? Blavatsky.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of these like emergent spiritualities were led by women. Christian Science, also women founded and led. The Theosophical Society. Seems pretty common.
Louisa did quite a bit of her own work, correct?
Louisa, yes.
When they were like, because I've taken one class on that Rhine Institute online. I actually, for some reason, think of Louisa before I think of JB.
Love it. Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So
they wrote books and
I'm sorry.
No.
So they got to Duke and kind of took over what they were, what the Psychical Society was doing. What was Pear around yet, or did that come after the Princeton Engineering
Anomalies? Which is so freaking fascinating. I believe
so cool, right?
Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. Was that after?
Later.
Was that after? Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were from the parapsychological perspective trying to bring that into the lab. And well, I personally think that even just your average psychology is kind of a hard thing to do science on, just because there are so many different variables that are hard to calculate for. So too, it seemed was parapsychological research and experimentation. This is where Zener cards were born. And if anybody listening doesn't know what those are, if you remember the opening scene of Ghostbusters where Peter Venkman, Bill Murray's character, is testing that couple and shocking them, those are Zener cards. And they kind of came out of, I think card guessing originally came about prior to J.B. Rhine coming to Duke, right? There was a predecessor there. Who didn't like the results he was getting. And then the Zener cards were developed later, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
They produced a lot of work, a lot of journals out of there too. What did they find in that research?
Okay. So yes, I'm so glad you brought up that there were other cards prior to like the Zener cards, which I think are more well known. That was developed with J.B. Rhine and one of the gentlemen at Duke, Carl Zener. But prior to that, there the similar sort of like, fashion of it, like cards with people's names written on it, like first names. There were cards with just letters of the alphabet. There were cards with like numbers, all sorts of different, like the sort of same vibe as what eventually led to the Zener cards. But I remember hearing one of the stories of like research that they did with like the cards involved this student, Hubert Pierce, who was like,
It's ringing a bell.
Yes.
Yeah, it was.
He's in that book, Nick.
Which book?
The what's it called? The one by Stacey Horn.
I've read more than 2 books. Stacey Horn. That's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Sorry. Courtney, keep going.
I'm so glad he's in that book. I haven't had a chance to read that.
Oh, it's pretty good.
It's very good. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. I can like see the cover in my head with like, Hubert Pierce was sort of like a star student for a bit at the Duke Parapsychology Labs, who was a student who heard about the work there, got involved, and did some experiments with the cards, and in one study got 25 in a row, like called 25 in a row correctly, and the odds are just like some astronomically large number that I cannot even fathom looking at, like in print, like even with its, I mean, it's just unreal. So yeah, a lot of the early work had to do with like using those Zener cards. A lot of the early work involved hypnotic states. And but yeah, Hubert Pierce like always stands out to me when people like ask, like, so what did they do? What did they find?
I think that a lot of the results haven't been. You hear a lot that they have not been replicated, but have they been tested even or tried to be replicated in different places? I know there's really very few institutions that will even be willing to do this anymore. But do you know if any of the that early Duke work got replicated, maybe by some later groups, perhaps even pair or? Because I know that several people actually have graduated out of these programs with parapsychology degrees. Like
Jeffrey Mishlove has one, I think. I think he has a parapsychology. Does Dean Radin? Yeah.
There's not many left though in the US. Like I think you say it like that. Like Hansen has a parapsychology degree that came out of there. I think he came out of that program.
There's oh sorry, go ahead.
No.
If they bring back a program, I'll go back to school and get a degree.
Well, they were, but I think that was the thing. It was from reading about the experiments in Hansen's book. I think that people did they were. I think one of the things going back to that first question is like they were really introducing scientific rigor to the process, which is when you were saying like different than going out ghost hunting. You know, ghost hunting is more of like a personal experience. And I think a lot of us know that like in public, you could do mentalist kind of tricks that you can duplicate, like a card magician can duplicate any kind of, like there's a lot of ESP mind reading tricks. So and I think Duke tried to even up the rigor. I know there's some people, debunkers were not satisfied with what the Rhines did in terms of scientific rigor. Now I'll say debunkers will never be satisfied, no matter what, but because that's the nature of a debunker versus a skeptic. But I think, I don't know if they've been duplicated, but I think similar experiments have been done with higher rigor. But I also think, again, it's like it's the taint of the paranormal. You know, we need to be doing serious research on serious things and not this. And also, I sort of also think that dovetails into the kind of the emergent sociology of science, that people are actually studying more of like how the biases of experimenters, not just determine the outcome of experiments, but even like the course of what they're doing in the first place, which I know scientists don't like, but.
Well, I have some thoughts, but I think I do want to make space, Leah, because I feel like I saw you maybe having some thoughts or reactions.
Well, so one of the things I come back to with this subject pretty often is the, just in a broad general sense, akin to what Jay is saying, kind of just I have said things like this before on the show, much to people's ire, kind of the limitations of scientific methodology to explore and evaluate this particular kind of subject. And I say that because almost everybody has some kind of synchronistic experience or telepathic experience throughout their lives. And the notion that these experiences are lab reproducible to me seems a little bit of a long bow to draw, because many of them occur under they occur under circumstances that simply cannot be replicated, right? In a lab environment. And that was really all I was going to say, is that part of like the very woo self-indulging side of me is basically like science is never going to be able to do anything directly to demonstrate this stuff. Like we can talk about it from a folklore, anthropological, sociological, et cetera perspective, but the idea that like you're going to get statistically significant performance in a closed system of a lab setting, that seems like kind of barking up the wrong tree on this subject. But that's just me editorializing.
I think we can make similar comments to regular psychological experimentation too. I mean, like how many factors affect someone's behavior? You know, how many lurking variables are there in any psychological experiment?
Well, and this is, I mean, look, this is also, this has been a big thing in psychology and even psychiatry, right? The whole medical pathologizing of mental health, right, is very much an artifact of trying to demonstrate the legitimacy of psychology and psychiatry, right? And I think, and I've certainly spoken about this, I think the sort of Western clinical tradition's inclination to pathologize pretty normal human experiences, right? Like, it is not only to our detriment, but also fails to provide non-medical, non-pathology interventions or integration processes to help understand and metabolize these kinds of experiences. So put another way, I talk a lot on this show, Courtney, about spiritual emergence and emergent phenomenology, and this idea that like lots of people have these experiences, and if you go to a standard issue psychiatrist, they're going to pump you full of benzodiazepines and mood stabilizers to knock you out of the experience. But then you have other practitioners, including like Stanislav Grof, if we're going to draw it specifically on doctors, but even just like spiritual traditions, that basically see these as an artifact of particular spiritual or social or cultural processes, and they're meant to be supported and integrated rather than just sort of anesthetized out of existence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you just ended on such a soundbite. That was so good. It like got me right in my feels.
Thank you.
I am loving this conversation. So one of the things that I love about like highlighting the work that was done like at the Duke Parapsychology Labs and elsewhere is that I do think their methods were pretty rigorous. Like these people knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
They knew statistical, measures. They knew what it meant for something to be statistically significant. And in some of their studies, they did find statistically significant results for things like, extrasensory perception or basically these like Hubert Pierce, like that should not have happened regardless of what it was. I mean, it's definitely anomalous, but it shouldn't have happened. And what I think is really cool, I just think it's really cool that you can like access research articles where people are like scientists and researchers are like, hey, we want to design a scientific experiment about something weird and woo. And hey, we're gonna be pretty rigorous about it. We're gonna maintain the same standards that our colleagues over in wherever are applying to their fields that just don't have the stigma of the fringe placed upon them. And they did get statistically significant results. But one of the things that parapsychologists then and now will readily, talk about and admit is that like a lot of them believe there is an inherent quality about like psi, like PSI or the phenomena or whatever you want to call it, that just does not make it suitable for replication in a laboratory setting, laboratory study setting. And back then and still today, there were so many who were just like, we don't need to be in the lab studying this. We need to be like elsewhere. Like there was oh gosh, his name is escaping me, but a scholar with in Japan who wrote for the Japanese Journal of Parapsychology did this study called Psi on a Mountaintop. And he basically was like, I'm going to set up like, I think it was like ESP related, some sort of ESP related design, whether it was with cards or something else. He was like, I'm going to do it like in a laboratory setting that is not very inspiring and is very cold and clinical. And then I'm going to take those people and I'm going to send them up on a mountain that's beautiful. And we got this view and it's inspiring. And we're going to do the same experiment. And, I don't, and of course, like he got, statistically significant results when they were like up on the mountaintop, but I don't mean to like talk so like long, but
Please do.
This is why you're here.
You're the guest. Yeah.
The researchers readily admit that like they do think that there is something inherent. I think a lot of parapsychologists today will call it like the right person at the right place.
Yes.
And that cannot be captured easily
Yes.
in a lab, and it cannot easily be replicated. And Leah, I think that you would really enjoy one of the women in the parapsychology timeline who I wanted to learn about at Duke was Rhea White.
Mm-hmm.
And she worked at the Duke labs in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and was also a librarian. And she became very sort of like disenchanted with the focus on doing like very clinical laboratory studies, and was like, we need to investigate these subjective experiences that people are having and the impact that it's having on their lives. And so she actually coined the phrase exceptional human experiences.
Oh, cool.
And was like, this would be like, she saw the value not only in clinical studies, but like we need to combine that also with more, I think somebody talked about it here in the comments, a more ethnographical like approach to this phenomena. Things are happening. It's impacting people in a powerful way. And that alone is worth capturing.
Yes.
I want to, I'm seeing a couple of the comments, one from Jack, and a couple from Vancouver Guy. I think one of the things about doing these experiments and especially establishing the context of the time, I don't think that we today are aware of how influential spiritualism was and how prevalent belief in the supernatural was, and how many people in the public eye were making claims to have supernatural power and what we would call psychic ability now. Like, this was a much larger societal force than it is today. And I also see, like, I'm just going to say, like, very, very nicely, F. Skinwalker Ranch. That is, Skinwalker Ranch to science is the same thing as what like professional wrestling is to actual combat sports. Okay,
Exactly.
Skinwalker Ranch is fun. I watched the first 2 seasons of it. It is a goofy TV show with a cast of reoccurring characters that go and they are basically doing like what I do when I'm like, I'm going to go have mad scientist time. I'm going to shoot some lasers in my backyard. I am going to
put your goggles, button up your smock, and go blow some shit up.
I'm going to go blow some shit up. I got a rocket, and that is fun. Just like it's TV. Just like pro wrestling can be fun. Those people are not really fighting. And I'm sorry if this is the first time you've heard that to anyone, but that is you can come to terms with it. I really, but it is like, I also think one of the things now with science, and I think we talked about this because the last time I was on for the show, I was talking about Dean Radin, and I'm like, psi is factual. Psi is a statistically proven reality. We do not invest in non-commercial, like we're not like a Star Trek society where we invest in pure science. They hit a point where they're like, I can't make psi cola, I can't make psi bombs, I'm out. Like, I'm done. Like, I don't care. Statistical, yeah, you're right. Okay, it does. Like, give me consumer goods, give me weapons. Nah, it's like, we can't quite get there. So I was like, all right, screw this. And I mean, even in things like, this is something I did not know until yesterday reading another book. I'm up to 6 now, I think.
What?
I know. Well, you got to catch up, buddy. The standard model of quantum mechanics was not proven until 2012. So
Cool.
if you're reading like Hawking, like Stephen Hawking, Brief History of Time, and they're talking about all this stuff in there, like they didn't prove that until like a couple years ago, 11 years ago.
Sure.
So I mean, but I don't think anybody in these things is starting in this case talking about the Rhines and going through. I also will say this, like the only way to like be like such as it is, I think being like a famous ufologist is somewhat of a dubious notion. Like, but if you want to like make some bucks, you have to like have the, I'm having like the ufology title belt. Okay, like I'm going, like, I'm going to be like Jeremy Corbell, meet me at Skinwalker Ranch this summer, and we're gonna defend it. But
you got to watch out, dude. He knows quantum kung fu.
Yeah, I actually shouldn't have said that. Corbell is seeing this.
He's gonna get you.
Cool, brother. Yeah, he is. He's just going to like literally kung fu me through time space.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought up Skinwalker Ranch, Jay. I kind of want to talk about TV ghost hunting a little bit and how I think it does have an origin in parapsychology, but it's so far removed at this point. Because Courtney, when you got on, you talked about how kind of these weird topics are with probably a lot of us throughout our whole lives. I grew up watching sightings and unsolved mysteries, of course. And if you recall, back in the 80s, when they do ghost segments, they'd bring in Dr. William Roll. Are you familiar with him?
Oh, yeah.
So he would come in and he was kind of working with the theories of Michael Persinger. If you're familiar with him, he's kind of he's the God helmet guy. He's the impetus of the idea that electromagnetic fields can give us, the sensation of a presence in the room or cause hallucinations, which is something you do see in ghost shows now. They would have him in and he was testing that specific theory. But what I think happened, this is my own speculation, what I think happened is TV producers saw that. They saw the gadgets that they were using because they were doing baseline EMF stuff, but they liked that so much. And they saw, that scene in Poltergeist and Ghostbusters with the PKE meter. I think that TV producers have kind of created a format which we now, or which a lot of paranormal investigators now will call science, and that kind of traces back to TAPS. I don't know if you watched Ghost Hunters back in the day. Actually, I think they're still on, aren't they? But I think that's where these kind of science-based paranormal investigation with the gadgets, taking gadgets outside of their intended use and looking for anomalies, kind of spurred off from that. But now it feels like two completely separate camps, in my opinion. You know what I'm saying? Like the TV ghost hunting and actual parapsychology, I think, are quite different at this point, but they all kind of came from a similar place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think they're quite different. I think it's okay that they're different. And I think that it all kind of boils back to a genuine curiosity about the world around us, and however that's going to play out in your life or however you want to pursue it, or the various ways that we as humans like pursue it. I think it's really cool. Like for me, it's always both and. It's always both and. And I suspect probably for a lot of us here too, like I love reading the scientific, research studies, just because I think it's cool. We live in a world where we can read a research article about psychokinesis, but also it's like, I don't personally need science to tell me figures and numbers for things that I like subjectively know to be true in my own world. But yeah, and Leah, I thought I apologize if I had started talking over you.
Oh, no, not at all. When we talk about the television ghost hunters, I also always think of how the introduction, Nick, you've mentioned this idea of introducing scientific instruments into this practice is basically a function of introducing electronics, right? Like you introduce like tape recorders or oscilloscopes or whatever, in order to legitimize it. But the other thing that always comes to mind as well is sort of how this becomes tied up in gender, because like we tend to think of mediumship as very much a female focused practice, not exhaustively, but generally. And as a result, kind of more qualitative in nature, more earthy in a way. But that the introduction of ghost hunting on television with all these little electronics gadgets and things, the masculine coded things like science and logic and rational thought, and all this is basically like a way. I feel like there's a lot of gender stuff tied up in here. I'm just kind of riffing on this, but I do feel like this is a real thing. And I also think this ties back to this theosophy and Christian Science and a lot of these emergent mystical movements and spiritual movements also being spearheaded by women. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is such a fascinating conversation. Because I'm trying to like gather like my thoughts. First of all, I want to acknowledge somebody earlier, I think it was V, said that they grew up in like a Hindu household, that, you know, the supernatural was just like an inherent part of life. And I think that also, like Leah, you were talking about gender, the notions of gender and how they impact our views of like the paranormal, also like culture, and, you know, like that also impacts our views and experiences with the supernatural. And I one of the things that I did like in the Encyclopedia of Parapsychology was I tried to make an intentional effort at highlighting the international work of other people, because sometimes our conversations, and I understand it, it's not insidious at all, but our conversations tend to sometimes focus on efforts by the United Kingdom and the United States. But, you know, there were researchers, and there continue to be international researchers and also people all over the world experiencing phenomena and viewing it and making sense of it through their lived experiences and cultures and genders and so forth and so on.
So I'm sorry, go ahead. You do it.
You sure?
I can wait. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
one of the things I think about with the ghost shows, but like Courtney, you and I know a lot of people that do ghost fun stuff. Like they go to the haunted location and do some mediumship or do an Estes method and bring out the toys and stuff. I think, well, I say that because I actually think there's a difference. Like doing it yourself with a group of friends or with a thing like that is a like social phenomenon. It is trying to interface with the unknown. It is trying to have a personal experience or a shared experience with people. And it's since we don't we sort of live in for a lot of us, and this is again a very North American perspective, but you know, we talk about we don't have like kind of spirituality or miracles, things like this in a daily life. You can go out and like have this experience where you can touch the untouchable, for lack of a better way to put it. Now, I think the problem with the TV shows is the TV shows again are pro wrestling. The guys on the TV shows are playing like we are us bros, us like ghost bros are
ghost
right
bros?
now. Ghost bros are tonight going to prove the existence of life after death on this TV show on the Travel Channel. Please watch. And that's kind of like the same thing. Like, and they're really like, so again, like, I would say like going like no, I don't think anybody that goes to like a Strange Escapes or goes to like the Waverly Hills Sanatorium or goes to the Mansfield Reformatory in Ohio for a ghost thing is like, this is it, folks. We're gonna have this is like when they powered up like the collider at CERN. I don't think anybody has that, but I feel like the guy, it's kind of again on like the Skinwalker Ranch thing. We're gonna fire that one last rocket. and this is like the alien's going to be like, you got us, we're going to come down, and this is like there's, but it's just for lack of a better way to put it. So in the wrestling world, the suspension of disbelief before it was willful is called kayfabe, which comes from an old carnival term. Okay,
it's not kayfabe.
Kayfabe. Well, you know what? We could
you
say tomato.
Courtney,
I say tomato.
sorry I brought you into this nerdy conversation about wrestling.
Everything. Okay,
wrestling.
The psychology of pro wrestling is as close to a unified theory for understanding everything. As I have. But
humans.
I feel like when you start, there's like a lot of people that watch these shows. There's a lot of people on Twitter that are like, they don't like the kayfabe element, and I think some people like do think maybe they're going to prove it, but I feel like I have a tremendous amount of empathy and like support towards the people that go do stuff. Like I'm gonna get some toys. I'm gonna get a blinky light box and some stuff, and go try to have an experience. Versus the imposed like seriousness of the metafiction of like, we're on season 5 of Ghost Bros, and the tank's running dry.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's all. That's a bit of a. I can't rant, but yeah.
I was gonna say, so I'm reading this book right now called How God Becomes Real, and it's written by an anthropologist, and it's basically about it's exploring effectively how people form relationships with the invisible other. It's a really interesting book, and it keeps coming back to a few things. One is that the author was embedded in and worked with evangelical Christian communities in Africa, India, the United States, and then also talks about other religions, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, etc. And one of the things that is continually talked about is that people need to deliberately decide to cultivate this kind of relationship. It's not just like conferred upon them. They have to make the conscious decision to cultivate this relationship. Some people's relationships are much stronger right out of the gate. However, everybody has to practice having those relationships. So this is everything from Wicca and Thelema all the way through like evangelical Christianity. Like this is a relationship that must be a deliberate, intentional practice. The other thing that is emphasized across practices is basically learning the code of how encounters with the invisible other manifest in one's life. Right? Because there are things that in a purely secular society, we don't really attribute anything to. Excuse me, like for instance, like getting goosebumps or chills or intuition. But they talk about how the deliberate cultivation of these encounters and practices with the invisible other or others, basically teaches you, like sensitizes you to how to listen or kind of douse for these experiences. I'm very fascinated by this idea as someone partly who like, look, off screen, super fucking woo. Like I think the world and everything around us is talking to us constantly. Like we're always in conversation with it, whether you're aware of it or not. Yeah. Oh, real woo. Yeah. But also just this idea that these are practices that have to be deliberately cultivated. It's not just a thing that happens. It's a skill, and like any skill, there's variabilities and capabilities. So you have like Olympic athletes, and then you have guys who like were picked last for dodgeball in high school. Yes.
That's why I haven't met the invisible other too, right?
Yeah. No, I was a 3-season varsity athlete, Nick, and I regularly commune with the divine. Could these perhaps be related?
It'll be my turn one day.
But my broader point is that what strikes me so much about this book is that these are practice. This is a talent or a skill that can be deliberately cultivated, and that this is generally kind of universally acknowledged across different religious and spiritual practices, even though they don't use that exact terminology.
Like every time you like end, I'm just like mic drop, boom. I love this because I think also wrapped up in like what you were talking about here is like it's making space for the ways that the paranormal, the phenomena, the other, the invisible other impacts us in our own lives. And like, I always like to tell people, like, you don't have to qualify your weirdness. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to have the latest, hottest like gadgets. If you want to, though, that's totally cool. Just be
Mm-hmm.
weird, man. But like, you don't have to do it a certain way. You don't have to, only view it through a certain lens. And to Jay, to get at something that you said a second ago was, no, I don't necessarily think that people who like go to, to events like Strange Escapes or other things are necessarily like going in expecting I'm going to solve the riddle. I'm going to get all the answers. But what I think they're going in expecting, and what I think is actually more beautiful, is they're expecting to have a poignant experience of connection, perhaps with the invisible other, or connection with other weirdos. And to me, that's just like, that's the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's part of the reason I was, sorry.
No, please, Courtney, go ahead.
No, I think that that's part of the reason for the paranormal in our lives, in this world. I think there's a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons is that it creates these connections. It creates meaning in our lives. And it also, like, we're all connected here. And with the audience who was like commenting, like, we're all connected here because we're all weirdos and into this stuff. And I think that that's the paranormal, just sort of sitting back and being like, yeah, I did that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was we've had that, like the real phenomenon is the friends we made along the way.
I kind of lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
No,
it's fine. This is the nature of laggy internet.
I noticed some people in the comments talking about Catholicism. Do you know that in this field, I mean, is it primarily kind of a secular field, or do you see religious people engaging with it too, or like, are these ideas of religions and faith as we know it irreconcilable with these ideas of parapsychology or even spiritualism? Anybody?
I can hear you. I'm wondering if Courtney's internet is lagging.
Oh, sorry if it is. No, I'm just like, that was a heavy question that I'm like.
Oh, okay. You were thinking.
Yeah.
So, I ask this because I'm the resident, what people would call a skeptic, but I would say that I'm just a proponent of the psychosocial hypothesis as it applies to different fringe topics. Yeah. But I've always kind of, and I can't remember his name. The man who was trying to weigh the soul. What was his name? McDougall? Does that sound familiar? It's where the soul. Oh
yeah, like the 22 grams or whatever.
Yeah. I've always, we've discussed this before. I see that as very similar as using kind of the technology now, and I see that as kind of a secular search for the soul, being that like whether it's electromagnetic fields or any kind of like spiritual energy coming out of these things, they kind of fill the same role, but from different perspectives. I just wonder if there's much crossover there or not.
Yes. Okay. I see it now. Yes. Sorry. I'm like trying to look at the comments and like,
I know they're being very distracting.
I totally agree with you, Nick. I think that is something that like we don't talk about often enough. And this is one of the reasons why I've always been like, wait a minute, the skeptics, like, let's just say like in the academy, who sort of go after people who are researching parapsychological stuff. I'm like, are you going after the religious studies folks as hard as you're going after the parapsychologists? Because if not, you're kind of a hypocrite.
There's a problem.
I mean, they are similar. Nope, lost my train of thought now.
Though
it's catching me. We got to go easier on the bongs before the show.
Going back to like the several books I've read, the handful. Hansen talks about that in Trickster and the Paranormal. I know I'm going to always bring that up, but Hansen talks about in the academy how there's sort of like, but this is again like Hansen is actually attributing this sort of like there's a a psychosociological aspect to it, and then there's like a woo aspect where as we transition from like a society governed by a charismatic leader to one that's governed by bureaucracy, the bureaucracy exists in part unknowingly to defend us from the paranormal. Because I think I saw somebody, I didn't even know what the comment was attached to, that was saying shouldn't caution be exercised here. And I don't know what it was about, but Lakoff is literally the only person I have read that says this stuff can be dangerous. And it can be literally, he starts off with an example of literal danger where I can't remember what group of natives he's talking about. I want to say it was the Sioux, but somebody would have to go through the book and look at it. And they're studying coyote stories. And it's the anthropologist studying this. And at one point, the guys that he's looking have to be like, just pull him aside and say, you need to stop or somebody's going to die. And they said, this is the access. This is what happens if you want to become a magician. You read these stories, and once you complete them, somebody dies. And then you become a magician, and that's the sacrifice. And they're dead serious. And this guy had synchronistic events where there were some close calls. He had some things where he himself experienced some medical trauma in the course of this. I would also say argue like Keel in the Eighth Tower is making the tacit argument that this stuff is dangerous because it can drive, it's like, drives people to madness. Like people become, and I know that's something, I even remember Greg Newkirk talking about this once, saying, once you can have these experiences, like once you have like the experience, like when you're like raw dogging the numinous, okay,
it's like my weekend plans every weekend, dude.
You either go, well, this is what we're saying also in a society that's unmoored by any kind of initiation into this. Right. You see the UFO and you could go nuts. You could go nuts and ruin your life spending like every dollar and every ounce of your energy chasing the dragon and trying to figure out what the hell happened to you. Because it's kind of the same thing. Like I would say, it's kind of like instead of being a initiate in a shamanistic tradition, you pay some bros to go take ayahuasca in a yurt somewhere, and you're just like, and you have like a psychotic break because you can't go from like 0 to ego death in 2 seconds without a little bit of training.
This to me feels like one of the major problems right now with particularly ketamine therapy, but psychedelic therapy in general. And I say this as a huge proponent of psychedelics. I think psychedelics are really powerful, important tools. But also, holy smokes, I cannot imagine pumping someone full of ketamine and giving them a fully like transcendent ego dissolving experience in communion with like the cosmos without also giving them an enormous kind of spiritual and ontological foundation and preparation far afield from kind of the conventional understanding of reality. To do so seems like deeply irresponsible. And also like super traumatic. Like people talk about these experiences as being deeply, deeply traumatic, and unsurprisingly, of course, they can be if you're ill prepared or equipped to integrate and metabolize the experience.
This is one of those things, actually, and Greg Newkirk and his group did an experiment like this, and I don't think they drew some criticism for this. I personally don't think anybody knew what they were getting into, but they hypnotized somebody into having an abduction experience.
Really?
And it ruined the guy's life.
When was this? Was this back in the Who Forted days? This
was back in the Who Forted days, I think. Because they were selling, like, I have some, it looks like a tape, but it's a USB drive with the regression. It's not a regression. They were just like putting this guy, it was like a simulated, and I think they were trying to see, because I know there's, like you said, like there's a psychosocial phenomenon. There's that other book that Leah, that you and I read, that's totally escaping me, where the guy's like, it's all real, but it's in your mind, but it's quantum, but it's not. You know what I'm talking about?
The Bhagavad Gita? I don't know, man.
But I will say one of the things that I just realized now, okay, and I'm becoming a little more pro gadget, okay, because perceiving the phenomenon via instrumentation gives you a little buffer.
Oh, I see, like an intermediary or a modulator.
Yeah, because sometimes, I mean, it's just like I'm just gonna because I've been getting into building electronics. It's like I'm just gonna slap a filter capacitor or some resistors on here, so I'm not like like blasting full power. Because like it's totally different to go do the Estes method on a haunted location, get some readings on your EMF meter that it would be, to quote the Ghostbusters, to had a full body apparition, like the thing in the library at the beginning of that would be that would change your entire life in one moment. Yeah, if you experience something like that. So I don't think anybody, and this is sort of, again, maybe the danger, when I build, I'm looking at building another side device, maybe I'm going to in classic Spider-Man villain tradition, I'm going to put that stuff on myself and hit the power, but I'm not asking anybody else to I'm not here, you want to be you be first. I'm if I become Dr. Mento or something after hooking the thing up wrong and you see me getting punched out by Spider-Man, that's on me.
That's why,
I'm gonna kind of lane change, because Courtney, one of the things I want to nerd out with you about is basically validated paranormal or parapsychological research. I'm especially thinking of the Global Consciousness Project, which came out of PAIR, because I spent a lot of time reading some of those papers, and am deeply, deeply fascinated by this.
Is that the one with the random number generators?
Random number generators, yeah, and sort of their relationship to world events. Yeah.
Now, how did that work? I think it was a large scale study with a number of participants where they had one of these random number generators and they would consciously try to affect it, right?
Yep.
And then they kind of looked at that data over a long period of time and noticed that there's a correlation of something during world events or local events and stuff. Where do people find this kind of stuff?
Well, I'm glad, Leah, that you brought this up, and I'm not sure, Nick, if this answers your question, but so the folks at Duke Parapsychology Labs were also doing research with random number generators, and yes,
I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah, and psi, and in particular through the sort of lens of psychokinesis, can we manipulate physical things? And so they did lots of studies with random number generators. I'm trying to bring to mind the name of one of the researchers, and of course it's blanking from me now. But yeah, they did those studies at Duke, all sorts of different with different sort of machinery, and then, like you said, continued at PAIR in a much sort of bigger way, and then we see the efforts now with the Global Consciousness Project that is really taking that research and that idea and applying it in just really cool ways.
Was that Roger Nelson?
There were a few people. I can't remember.
I think Radin had something to do with those too. But this is actually focusing on a kind of a very specific avenue in parapsychology, because it's not only psychokinesis affecting these things, but there's smaller subdivisions of this, of macro and micro psychokinesis, right? So when we think of psychokinesis, we think of Uri Geller bending a spoon, or that Soviet woman moving the thing under the glass. But this is kind of a concept of and I don't know if it's because of sensory gating, because I know they go into kind of sensory deprivation to test these things, but just on the micro scale, just these tiny, like you wouldn't see them if you're not looking for them. I think that was kind of the concept of this big experiment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some studies that they did with like micro psychokinesis, which I'm so glad you brought up, like micro and macro, and like things like micro psychokinesis might be manipulating the temperature to like maybe go up like a degree or half a degree, or these, like you said, the things that we don't necessarily see. And then macro PK would be like you said, the Uri Gellers, the more like poltergeisty things.
Courtney, I have a bit of a personal question around this subject. It's one of my favorites to ask people in and around high strangeness, which is, over the lifetime of your research and your work, how have your views changed? Like, are there views or beliefs that you had before that you no longer believe, or things you used to believe, or things you didn't believe and now do? Like, sort of, how has this shaped your personal views?
That is such a great question. Oh my gosh. Okay. Thank you for asking this. It kind of reminds me in a way, like something, Nick, that you were talking about a little while ago about this, like the sort of similarities with like spirituality and so forth. So to me, like personally, the phenomena is a spiritual outlook for me. Like I find like a lot of personal meaning. I find a lot of like connection through it. And it's really interesting because I've been having these conversations lately with like some friends and a cousin of mine about like, as somebody with generalized anxiety disorder, and the dissociation that sometimes comes from that. Like I feel I've been musing a lot about how the ghostly and the paranormal seems very familiar to me, because dissociation is like a ghostly act in my mind. And it's like one of those moments when like you're not really here and you're not really there, and like, what is a ghost but not really here and not really there. And on a more sort of less like woo broad sort of example, one of the things that has been changing for me recently is this idea that ghosts are just like waiting for us to come and talk to them. And I've been trying to like really ask myself, like, what is my sort of like personal definition of what a ghost is? Because I can get very philosophical. I mean, I think library books are ghosts, right? Like written by people, you know, during a particular point in their time. These authors may or may not be alive, and then they, you know, but anyways, okay. But I think what I tend to believe, and I'm still kind of working through it, is that we summon the ghosts like through like memory or through presence, and less that they're like literally like stuck there waiting for us, or that they're stuck anywhere. And there's other people like out there like in this community who talk about ghosts being, you know, like fragmented like moments in time, sort of fragmented echoes, if you will, like
the stone tape theory.
Yeah. And others who are in the community now, like if you guys have followed Amanda Paulson, pretty effing spooky with her theories of the paranormal emotive touch points, which are like,
I know, right? Yeah.
Wait, talk a little bit about this. We're UFO people generally, so here's your chance. Educate us.
Yay. Well, okay. Well, Amanda can be the one. Go check out her stuff. But yeah, she's got this, I'm not going to say it nearly as good as she says it, but this idea that like there are these paranormal emotive, these like huge emotional like moments that kind of like tap into or facilitate that like paranormal connection in a way. And so, and create echoes that ripple out to like later connect with us in ways. But yeah, she calls it the paranormal
emotive touch point.
points. Yes.
So I've been reading about this because it's in the most, I would call it a technology in the most broad sense of the term, but she's talking about how you don't have to travel to paranormal investigate.
Yes.
Yes.
That sounds
cool.
Yeah.
No, I love her stuff and her theories, and there are other people too. I don't ever want to seem like I'm like dismissing other people. Other people are also talking about very similar things. It's really cool, and I think it's one of the things too that I like to. One of the reasons that I like to tell people where you can access readings and research about it is that you can. Like the psychokinesis experiments using dice that were really popular in like the 40s, 50s, and 60s are deceptively simple experiments that, you can access those articles, you can read them, you can get inspiration, get weird one weekend, because like it is a privilege to be able to have the disposable income to go to these places. And now don't get me wrong, like I think if you want to go to these places, do it. That's cool. And I like that the money often goes to like keeping these places intact.
Yeah.
But also too, I think people like they think that they have to go to certain places.
Right.
Like Jay, what you were getting ready to say is, and I think I just like reminding people like you can just get like we are like the paranormal in my mind. Like you can get as weird as you want right in your own house, and hey, like get a bottle of wine.
Oh,
whatever.
and how? Yeah, buy some Xener cards.
I also remember Connor, from the Hellier crew, one of the originators of the Estes method, does it in his apartment.
Yeah.
He's just talking like he's trying to do that. And like I've done it on Zoom with people in different parts of the country.
Jay,
yeah,
people are going to be mad at me because I haven't watched Hellier.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry, Greg. What's the Estes method?
The Estes method is actually came from Connor J. Randall and some other folks who were the in-house paranormal investigators at the Estes Hotel the hotel in Estes Park. I can't remember the name of the hotel right now, but it's
the Overlook Hotel.
It's not the Overlook. It's the Overlook in the movie. Okay, so the Estes method is essentially one person. You have the Stanley Hotel. The
Stanley, right?
You have an interlocutor, so you just have somebody that would be asking the questions, and then you have a receiver. So the receiver is a person that has a ghost box, and then they are doing visual and audio sensory deprivation. So they have
Gonsfeld style,
really heavy noise canceling headphones and a really heavily opaque blindfold. So it would be like you are going to verbally ask, and there's an observer. So Leah would be the observer, Courtney could be the observer, I could be under you.
I like to watch.
Question.
Sorry, Jay.
No. You would ask the question, and then I would be scanning, and I'm going to verbally state what I hear through the ghost box.
Okay.
So we're having a multiple person conversation with entities or entity in question.
It's kind of like CE5. This is basically CE5 for ghost people.
Do you have a shack hack or like a Frank's box, Jay?
Yeah, I do. I actually have I have the gadgets. If anybody, somebody said Nick should go out with the gadgets. If you want somebody to go out with the gadgets, like I love the gadgets. Just personally, I love any kind of gadget.
I've
like
seen it in your Twitter feed.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So I have a pretty nice one. I actually have one too that will record on an SD card, so you can hear. You can,
cool.
Relative to what I'm saying in terms of playback. You could listen to what it was recorded through the sweeps. Although I'm going to warn everybody, and I've warned people I've done this with, I don't have good FM, AM stations in my area. So I use FM to sweep. And if it comes to music, I will sing, which is terrifying. But I will, if I get really a really strong thing in it, some music, I'm singing. Like it's just you gotta got to deal with it. But
oh, sorry.
No, but yeah, Amanda's stuff is really interesting. And again, like I think like again, you don't have to go to the stuff. I want to go to Strange Escapes, but just because I saw everybody's 30s, 1920s party outfits, like, and some of the stuff is just it is a little expensive. Like I went to, well, you and I saw each other, Courtney, in Detroit.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, oh, that's like I'm doing Detroit, and then that's pretty much it for this year. But yeah.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing in Detroit?
We went to, I know I like very, very briefly saw you, and it was like, it was was it the Day Paranormal? No, Die Paranormal.
Die Paranormal event at
Cool.
Oh, it was like a beautiful old mansion. What was the name of that? The Whitney.
Yeah.
It's like a beautiful mansion.
It's incredible.
Has like a haunted history, and they just sort of did like an evening, a dinner, and like a panel, and Jay, like I like what you're saying about like talking about how you really vibe with like gadgetry, and I think that's cool. Like what I really hope that everyone feels empowered to do is seek out and experience the phenomena in whatever way feels natural to them, instead of feeling pressured to like think that they have to do it a certain way. You know what I mean? And so I think, hey, like if gadgets are your thing, then I think that's awesome. And what's really cool is that we can all gather and talk about it and be like, this is how I experience the phenomena.
That's the best part of those gatherings is you can have like people that are psychic and people that are like practicing magicians of different styles, and people that are like me that are like I got the toys, I got the gadgets ready. Yeah, it's really fun in that aspect of it.
And also that it's okay to just have fun, you know, like you know, like if you get inspired to like, you know, by something you read about a parapsychology experiment using dice, like just have fun with it, you know, like your goal isn't to like solve it all or get your night published in a scholarly article, and like that's okay. Like just engage and have fun and be weird, and I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, it's not a competitive sport, right? And I also think I think paranormal, I mean spirituality is also lends itself to this. I think we collectively can fall into this sort of capitalist trapping of thinking that in order to be into shit associated with it, right? Like to be a writer, you actually don't have to buy a laptop or a typewriter. You can just write.
Exactly.
And I think that there is this sort of commodification of a lot of these practices into, now look, Jay, you're excluded from this because I know you're in your basement with like a soldering iron building this shit and testing that on yourself. But I feel like I see a lot of it in like my universe of woo with like crystals and tarot decks, right? You don't need 100 tarot decks. This is not a competitive sport. And I'm totally with you in terms of this not being, I think the other part of this, maybe the sidecar to the you don't have to buy all the shit, is also, Courtney, I totally agree with you. Like, you don't have to follow some prescriptive practice. This is not about being the most smart and the most correct, right? Yeah. And having space for these more integrated processes that draw upon multiple different traditions and lineages. And Nick is getting ready for his OnlyFans debut after the show. And I think this is really kind of how it's done when it's done authentically, is you kind of pick and choose different practices and ideas. An aside here was I was getting very deep and serious about Buddhist practice over the last 18 months or so, going on lots of retreats, working with teachers, thinking very seriously about taking the precepts and committing myself to a lay monastic life and all this stuff. And then I talked to someone in the Buddhist community who is like the guy in Western Buddhism. And he was like, yeah, I don't know, I just do all the practices I like I'm not in a lineage. And it felt good for me to hear that, because I feel like it gave myself permission to then be like, oh, I can just kind of pick and choose and do my own thing. And it doesn't make me less of a practitioner.
Yes. Oh my gosh. One of my friends always loves to do like finger snaps when people say like awesome stuff. And I'm just like, yes, I love all of that. And I feel like too, like you said, Leah, like there's this pressure, especially when you're sort of learning about something or diving into it yourself, like there is that pressure to like do it certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
And how
Mm-hmm.
powerful must that have been for that person to tell you, like, just what feels natural to you? Just pick.
Yeah, just listen to your intuition.
Yeah, pick what works for you and leave the rest, you know?
Where in this subject, look, you wrote this encyclopedia, you've contributed to these other works. Where do you think are areas of this subject that are understudied or underrepresented that are worth consideration or further exploration?
Oh my gosh. That is fascinating. Underconsidered. Gosh, that's a tough one. I feel like I would just like to see the continued inclusion of like underrepresented voices, international voices,
Yes.
people from just all sorts, just more diversity, more diverse opinions, life experiences. I think that will help us make our understanding of how the paranormal impacts our lives much more, not only much more inclusive, but much more comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know the UFO community is terminally white and male. I didn't know if that crosses over to these other fringe communities too. It's the same case?
I think so. Yeah, I think maybe perhaps less toxically so than in the UFO community, which honestly, like, I love.
I would agree with this assessment so far. Yes, you're among friends here on this.
Okay. I love like reading about UFOs and like digging into it and so forth, but sometimes I don't want to like engage like publicly or socially because I'm like, this is fucking scary.
Yeah, this is speaking from experience. Really good choice.
Yeah, there's some real weirdos, but that is a good point. Yeah, I think and what is it? Why do you think that is about these kind of fringe or weird communities that there isn't much representation outside of white men? Well, especially when we were talking about like women began this movement originally, and I think what you were saying earlier, Leah, is a really interesting avenue to walk down. It had never crossed my mind, but you made a good point.
I see. My answer to this, and Courtney, I would love to hear your thoughts on this, but my answer to this would be that I think the kind of weird studies community more broadly has a more perennialist bent than the ufology community. What I mean by this is that people seem to have a better collective understanding that different traditions and practices, even though they may vary in their terminology and explicit tactics, are all kind of pointing in the same direction, right? So you have, like, I look at practice, like when you were describing the Estes practice, I was like, oh, like I would think of that as like a very particular kind of meditation practice. Yeah. But it was very easy for me to map what I would call this to what Jay was talking about. Whereas I think in ufology, and I also think this is an artifact, frankly, I think it's also still a conspiratorial subculture far more than like weird studies are. So you tend to get this like more conspiranoic kind of thought pattern, plus the like kind of your average white middle class dude who falls prey to the trappings that his views are the only logical, rational ones and everyone else is an emotional, histrionic mess. Like, I think and finally, sort of the inflexibility of the UFO community, right? Like people, I think the sort of language and understanding of ufology tends to be far more brittle than the ideas that I hear talked about in the weird, like the kind of weird studies or high strangeness community. Right, Courtney, when you said, "Oh, I think of books as ghosts," I was like, I totally get this. I could like I would be completely comfortable with that argument. Whereas like in UFO in the ufology community, like you would have people like, I don't know, threatening to dox your family if you made such a crazy statement.
Yeah, that's wild. And I think I'm looking at the comments. I think Vancouver guy has sort of nailed what I was going to say, that I think it just goes back to an extension of like just the systems that oppress like certain voices and celebrate others, and all, the academy is not, immune to that historically either. So I feel like that's part of the reason why you saw a lot of a particular type of voice from a particular type of person. And I think it's getting better, like many of our systems. But it's like, I like to remind people, when you're digging into the historic literature, you have to be on guard for the like implicit and explicit ways that people were erased. Like, let's say, even in the 1970s, there was an article published in, I think it was like the friggin' Journal of Parapsychology, that referred to the Rhines as Dr. JB and Mrs. Rhine. And it's like,
I had no idea she had a doctorate until you mentioned this evening.
And it's also like, if you want to, like, going back even further to like the 1800s and like early 1900s with like Eleanor Sidgwick and her husband Henry Sidgwick, who were psychical researchers. Like Eleanor wrote a lot of stuff and was like a prolific researcher, but in the bylines of things that she wrote, it literally just says Mrs. Henry Sidgwick. And so if you don't even dig a little bit, you would never even know her name. So, and these are like white European people, so we can assume that it's much worse for like lots of other people. So yeah,
that was a terrible tradition for a long time, just like Mrs. Bob Smith. But I'm even thinking of that. It's still like, so somebody was saying the other day, and I can't remember her name because my brain is cabbage, but the local reporter at the paper, who was actually like the number one point person in Point Pleasant. And I can't remember her name.
She just passed away.
Yeah, she just passed away recently.
Right.
Keel, we think of like John Keel, man of action, but like she was there every day getting the stories. Also had some really strange Men in Black encounters.
That's gonna drive.
Had a lot of high strangeness in her life, and it's just kind of, but she's like a footnote in John's story, because John's writing his own story about it, and it's kind of like she's there, but really a very important person in that whole case.
I see V here had a question. Does the Psi community get political, conspiratorial at all? Yeah, I think so. I'm sort of like
MAGA hat ghost people.
Yeah, I think that it definitely like does, for sure. Like, I don't think it's to the extent, from what I have heard, like with like the UFO community or anything like that. But I think mostly like what you see, to answer your question, V, is that it definitely does get kind of like political and pointed, like among different disciplines in the academy that sort of like to go at anything that is on the fringe. Parapsychology just sort of being one of those, which is kind of interesting, because I've noticed that like some disciplines tend to go at it harder than others, like engineers and physicists are just like, like, what, you're not telling us anything that we don't already know about this world.
Engineers and physicists, though, like, this all goes to the, like, honestly, I really believe this is the 6th book I've read, George Lakoff's The Political Mind. Lakoff is the guy that really talks about internalizing beliefs to become identity, and I have like never seen that harder than I have with the hard science folks. And
Oh, yeah.
like they just like, because though I mean I remember like literally 1,000 years ago when I was in college, those folks didn't want to acknowledge psychology and sociology as science. Like that is woo
Mhm.
woo for them.
Mhm.
Those
Mhm.
are just like, oh, that's like woo woo crap. That's not real science.
Yes.
Like real science has like a load bearing calculation in it somewhere. But I also like, and I was really good friends with one of those guys for decades. I'm still friends, lost touch, but that guy told me once, this is literally at the level of like, I'm committed, not even like to the quantum, like the standard model of particle physics, like committed to like the Newtonian model almost, where like if we cannot quantify, this kind of relates to the AI art and AI writing thing now, but he really believed that it's like if we cannot quantify everything, including like art and science, then there's nothing. Then there's like the universe is like pointless chaos, and we like instantly have succumbed to entropy. And that guy like really, I was like, wow, okay, man, well, it's cool. Like
All right.
like hugs, brother. Like I hope you're okay. Now I'm sorry I brought this up, but
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Leah. Sorry.
but
oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say though, but those things, like when they get rooted in your brain, and this is what Lakoff discovered because he's doing some of this with neurological studies with imaging. Like when your beliefs are threatened, that core belief that constitutes your identity, the same paths of your brain are lighting up as if though I was physically threatening you. Like if I'm like,
someone tell UFO Twitter,
your beliefs are false, or it's like the same on your EEG lights up as if I like pulled out a knife.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me from the interactions that you and I have on the daily basis.
Yeah.
Welcome to the internet, man.
Well, I have seen like what you said and what Courtney said. Like I've seen people have personal disagreements in high strangeness land, and there's ego. There's definitely egos, but I've never seen anything like I've seen on UFO Twitter with that.
Yeah, that's kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's not worth it, honestly.
No. So Courtney, have there been I have kind of a two-pronged question in case you want to write them down. My first question is, and feel free, of course, to not answer this if you don't want to because it is personal. Did you have like any particular experience or event in your life that prompted an interest in this subject? And then the second question is, what thinkers or writers or creators or artists or whatever, who has like informed your own view, or who's been especially formative for you?
Okay, I love both of these. I've had like some personal experiences like of the paranormal. I think that it was more so just like a natural curiosity and affinity for those topics. Like probably a lot of us, like I remember reading a book. I think like the first like supernatural related book that I read was about the haunted history of the Tower of London and like then also the Loch Ness Monster. And I was like, what is this?
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool.
And from there I was just like, I'm hooked, man. But I do remember just like a few just kind of like minor, I guess, like paranormal experiences. Nothing that really like stands out as like that was it for me. And in terms of writers and creators and art, oh my god, okay, so
or even like a book, like anything formative.
Yes. Yeah. So I do remember, definitely reading about the Tower of London when I was younger, for sure. And reading about like the Loch Ness Monster, watching, like Unsolved Mysteries with like my mom, and like hearing I think also too, what was really formative for me was hearing the stories that my family would pass down about their
Cool.
paranormal experiences. Yeah. I think those really like impacted me too, because not only was it like, oh, this is like part of like my family's history, like these people, you know, having these experiences, and also just being interested in the topic. And in terms of writers and creators and artists currently that I'm just like obsessed with, I have really been obsessed with the work and life of Rhea White, who was a psychical researcher at Duke University, who later went on to become a librarian. She did a lot of research, in particular in her early years, with extrasensory perception in children, school children, that is. And she did those tests with her co-researcher, Margaret. And when I went to Duke University, I really wanted to find more about her life, because she was like, you know, this weirdo, just like me, this librarian, just like me. And I like what I found, I was not expecting to find nearly like 70 pages worth of these love letters that she had written to Margaret. And they, like, when I say that they are like changing my life, like I really mean that. They're just so, I mean, not only was like, this was the 1950s, it was North Carolina. These were women in the academy. I mean, there's so many intersections of this, and also too the fact that Rhea came up with this beautiful theory of exceptional human experiences, and literally created like a database where like she was capturing these really powerful experiences just because she saw the value in capturing that for the record, like for just the human record, and far less concerned about like she was far less concerned, and this is one of the reasons I love her, far less concerned about, can I prove what you just told me, and more, how did this impact your life?
Yes. Oh, I love this. This is something I love this for a very personal reason, which is I think that I think this is what should be done, or how experiencers should be approached, right? Basically from an ethnographic perspective, to hear narratives like what Alfred Kinsey did for sex, basically. Yeah. It's not a question of proof. It is a question of sort of exploring and documenting human experience. Yeah. I love this. I want to look her up and learn more about her.
Yeah. She, so she also wrote similar books as like what I wrote, in particular for a number of like decades. She would write bibliographic resource, like just books that were basically just gigantic bibliographies about, like, you know, the parapsychological research 1970 to 1979, and here's the book, you know, and
like the Cheryl Costa of the 70s, basically.
And another librarian that I'll talk about, George Eberhardt, who wrote Geobibliography of Anomalies.
Cool.
Which is such a freaking cool book. Indexing. It's actually international. Well, I think it's United States and Canada. But like indexes all of these like cool experiences. And yeah, so Rhea is one. She has passed away. Whoops, sorry. She passed away in 2007. I'm in the process. I have found 2 people who knew her in real life who have agreed to talk to me. So I'm hoping to learn more about her. And yeah.
That's awesome.
Amazing. All right. We are coming up right on the top of the hour.
I can tell because my eyelids are just
yeah, you're getting tired. I know. I'm getting hungry.
Could I plug something on Courtney's behalf?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I could say see Alay in the comments, and at the last year's Pan Paracon, Courtney and Leah did an amazing presentation on doing your own research.
Oh, cool.
For any kind of how to get into doing research. One of my favorites of totally awesome ones. That is, if you go to YouTube, look for Pan Paracon and search through, we cut it into individual segment if you just want to go right to that. But the two of them did an amazing job. And that is, if you're just like, I need more Courtney in my life right now, you can go watch that right after this, right after we sign off.
Thanks for plugging that, Jay. Yeah, Allie like designed that whole presentation. Like, speaking of another, she's also a spooky librarian as well, and somebody who inspires me. And yeah, so
it had the cutest graphics of any presentation that I've seen. That like alone is worth noting.
Wonderful. So Courtney, where can our audience find you?
So I am most active on Instagram at liminal.librarian. That's where you can find me. And also too, I just want to say that if you're like interested in, not just my works, but like the books that we were constantly talking about tonight, ask for them at your local library, see if they can get a copy in some way for you, save your money, maybe go buy a pair of dice and get weird one weekend. But I always just like to remind people truly that like it's a privilege to be able to have money to spend on, buying books. And by all means, if you want to own a book, go for it. But also know that like you don't have to spend any money to access all the weird literature out there. So yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm totally with you. Yeah.
You reminded me of that. Like, I don't need to spend $100 on Amazon and go to library and then go to another paranormal event.
Yeah. Or, or hey, like if you see a book that looks really awesome, you could support your local bookstore and but yeah, if you ask your libraries to get it, I mean, your authors, whatever book it is, your authors like still eventually get paid for that. So you're still supporting your authors, but you're also, saving yourself some money and enabling the next weirdo in line to find it, so.
Yes. No. Wonderful. Courtney, thank you again. We would love to have you back in the future.
Absolutely.
Like what came immediately to mind was like, we got to have her on to talk through how to conduct research on weird shit, because this is a critically underserved area. Jay, thanks so much for bringing it up. Courtney, happy wonderful night. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
Again.
Take care. All right. That was awesome.
She's great. I love her.
She was great.
She's
yeah.
like one of the best people.
She's a treasure. Also nice to not talk about UFOs for a week. And I've been jonesing to talk about Rhine and parapsychology.
I don't even know what's happening with UFOs. I literally, like, whatever happened, UFO Twitter got blue-balled by it so quickly. And then it's just like, I don't even know what it was.
Are you talking about the flares over 29 Palms from
Bell,
or well, Gary Nolan going to that investor
Gary Nolan
about aliens?
It was Nolan that I was thinking of, but then it's like it's like we blew out on Nolan. We got the flares.
Eric Weinstein kind of like getting totally brainwormed in the last few days has been my point of entertainment.
Paulson would be great to have on. Amanda Paulson.
Sure.
Pretty
add her to the list. Yeah. Cool.
I don't know. I just feel like there's so many people on that side of the fence that are interesting to talk to. You could get the Liminal Earth guys on, get Garrett Kelly on. He builds stuff too, and he's also a hangout. So
cool. Ooh, that's something to talk about.
Yeah. I don't know. There's just a lot of people. I do. I love her. She's like literally one of the nicest people.
Jay, you said that was Pan Paracon on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that out.
That's it. You had Vanessa. That's like the thing that Vanessa and myself and Marissa Zeledman work on together.
Awesome.
I don't know if we're doing it again because last year almost killed us, but yeah, it was good. But all the videos are like, we want them to live up there in perpetuity forever, and we cut them individually. So like, if Courtney ever is like, or Alicia Landreth was the other librarian. I don't know. Like sometimes when people have like a pseudonym, I don't want to like accidentally dox them by giving their real names, but I think
like Leah Prime.
Well, I also want to say there's part of me that's like, I really am freaked out a little bit by the intensity of the UFO bros and how much is directed against the show, which I just view as it's a good show, but like they really are like secret government cabal shit. And I want to say, there's part of me that wants to say, like, I don't want this guy to even know I'm alive, but like, there's part of me that wants to be like, if Chupacabra, if you're listening, that whole fucking, I'm always at home, I never leave, and that whole fucking speech about the armaments they have in Aliens 2 is what I have in my fucking house. I have nukes, I have knives, I have sharpened sticks. Don't
even worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't even address it because it's just so unhinged. Like,
it's like.
It's a joke. There are some real freaks who orbit him, though. So, you know.
Well, those guys I don't know. There was stuff like that, though. I hate to say this. Like, there is stuff like that, not so much in the weird community, but in the occult community.
Oh, for sure.
Really?
Yeah, the occult community can be real strange. It's funny. I think a lot of that comes too from having these lineages where like you have guru relationships with teachers and instructors, which tends to breed this like really weird shit.
You also have a lot of Nazis that are trying to conceal the fact that they're Nazis.
Totally true, dude. There's the alt-right, I mean, the fascist creep is for real a thing, but you see it a ton in the occult community. You see it a lot in like, honestly, you see it a lot in like the esoteric Buddhist community.
Yeah,
a lot.
I really hope Greg Newkirk doesn't get mad though, because he gets like, he name searches and he's like, I don't know. The problem is like, the one thing I want to say is like, I know everybody's got dickish personal beefs with each other that could be resolved on a lot of these people if they would just talk to each other, but they don't.
Yep.
And
human communication.
The people that, I hate to say this, okay, because I'm not like, the people that are making like their prime, where it gets shitty is the people that are trying to make their primary income from weird shit are like, get like, you know, it's like if you criticize them, it's like you're trying to stick them for their paper, not criticize like something they did or didn't do. Like that was a fucked up experiment. I just literally, I hate to say this, okay, like I don't think those guys knew what they were doing. I think it was classic, like a mad science, like we're gonna hypnotize this guy and do this without really having the back. Like the person that I think is at fault is the hypnotist. Like if he had ethics,
who had like an ethical, who had an ethical kind of.
Well, because if you're like, you know, it's like if you came to me and wanted a brain machine but told me you had epilepsy, I would say no. Like there's no fucking way I'm giving that to you.
I don't have epilepsy and I still want that brain machine, man.
It's still yours. It's just you got married and went to the other part of the fucking country. Like I'll see.
Oh no, I'll be back.
I know.
I'm moving back.
Like, I know, but I'm just like, I'll see you when I see you. But like that guy should have said something. Like, look, man.
Right. Yeah.
Like this is not going to go. We can't just put him in here, make him live this experience, and then bring him out, like, and be like, and you're fine.
Right. All right. On that note, all right. Couple things to wrap things up for the evening.
Yeah.
First of all, just for people tuning in, Jay is adjunct, so he'll be joining us periodically in the future, as desired, when desired. Loved having you on this evening. Next week, we welcome Deborah Hyde, who is a British skeptic, folklorist, cultural anthropologist, and ufologist. Very excited to have her on. She's a big get. Thank you to Campbell for doing this. After that, we re-welcome back the beloved Vanessa Wililko, who will also be joining us as adjunct faculty in the future. So she'll be dropping in to host and co-host and join the conversation. Super excited to bring both of them on over the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for dropping in and joining us on your Wednesday evenings.
What?
That's it. Her internet is just like, it's done.
Get out of that sauna.
Yeah, I'm not in a sauna.
Yeah, you're broadcasting from a sauna. That's weird.
No,
it's real. No. It's inappropriate, really.
It's actually your internet is run through that Nick's SE30, which is trying its best. But I see in the background there, it's just like, I'm 30 years old. Like,
I had to like drop my phone onto the modem before I land. Cool. All right. On that note. Yes.
All right. Yeah. Whatever. See ya.
Yeah.
All right. Good night, Nick. Good night, Jay. Bye.
Good night.